The hall was filled with soft golden light, the kind that made everything look like a dream. White flowers covered the stage, hanging from above and lining the aisle. Every chair was perfectly placed, every detail carefully planned. It was the kind of wedding people talked about for years. Guests had already taken their seats. Some were smiling, some whispering, some quietly looking around in admiration. Many of them were important people, business partners, investors, well-known faces. They had all come to witness a powerful woman begin a new chapter of her life. At the center of it all, she sat in her wheelchair, dressed in a beautiful white gown that flowed gracefully around her. The dress had been designed specially for her, stitched with care so it wouldn't just look good, but feel right. Her hands rested gently in her lap, and her fingers tightened slightly as the minutes passed. She had built everything on her own. Years ago, an accident had changed her life forever. It took away her ability to walk, but it didn't take away her will. While others expected her to slow down, she did the opposite. She worked harder. She pushed forward. She built a business that grew faster than anyone had imagined. People admired her strength. Some even feared her determination. But today, she wasn't thinking about any of that. Today, she was just a bride. Her eyes stayed fixed on the entrance, waiting. The music had already started once and stopped. A small delay, someone had said, "It happens." She nodded at the time, forcing a calm smile. But now, 10 minutes had passed. Then 15. The whispers began to grow louder. Is everything okay? Why hasn't he arrived yet? Did something happen? Each word felt like a small weight pressing down on her chest. She kept her face steady, but inside, something didn't feel right. Her wedding planner walked up to her, trying to look calm but clearly nervous. She leaned down slightly and spoke in a low voice. "We're just checking on him. There's probably traffic." Traffic, that was the excuse. But deep down she knew this wasn't about traffic. She had always been good at reading situations. It was one of the reasons she succeeded in business. She could sense when something was off. And right now, everything felt wrong. Another 5 minutes passed. The music didn't start again. The guests were no longer whispering quietly. Now they were watching her, some with concern, some with curiosity, and a few with pity. She hated that look. Her fingers tightened again. Then, finally, someone approached her. Not the planner this time. One of the staff members, holding a phone. His face said everything before he even spoke. He hesitated, then gently handed the phone to the planner. The planner read the message. Her expression changed instantly. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. The bride noticed. "Tell me," she said quietly. The planner hesitated again, but there was no way to hide it now. She took a deep breath and spoke softly. He sent a message. The room felt like it had gone silent, even though it hadn't. "What does it say?" she asked. There was a pause. Then the words came out, slow and careful. "He says he can't do this." It didn't make sense at first. "Can't do what?" she asked, her voice still calm, almost too calm. But the planner didn't answer right away. And that silence said everything. Her chest tightened. "He's not coming," the planner finally said. The words landed heavily. For a second, it felt like the world had stopped moving. Not coming. Just like that. No explanation. No face-to-face conversation. Just a message. Her eyes stayed forward, but her mind was racing. All the plans, all the promises, all the moments they had shared leading up to this day. Gone. Replaced by a single sentence. Around her, the whispers had turned into something else. Shock. Confusion. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable. Others leaned in, trying to understand what was happening. She could feel it. Every single eye on her, waiting to see what she would do. She had stood strong in boardrooms filled with pressure. She had faced losses, setbacks, challenges that would break most people. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not like this. Her back straightened slightly, and she lifted her chin. If people were watching, she wouldn't give them a moment of weakness. But inside, something had cracked. A quiet tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away. The planner leaned closer. We can ask everyone to leave. We can cancel everything quietly. But she didn't respond. She couldn't. Because the truth was, she didn't know what to do. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely lost. The music had stopped. The lights suddenly felt too bright. The room that once looked beautiful now felt overwhelming. And then something unexpected happened. From the back of the hall, a small movement caught attention. A man stepped forward. He wasn't dressed like the others. His suit was simple, slightly worn. Not the kind of outfit you would expect at a high-end wedding. In one hand, he held a little girl's hand. She looked no older than 6. They had been standing near the back, almost unnoticed until now. The man paused for a moment. Looking at the scene in front of him, he could see everything. The empty space where the groom should have been. The guests watching. The bride sitting alone. His grip on the little girl's hand tightened slightly, not out of fear, but as if grounding himself. Then, slowly, he began to walk forward. People noticed. Some frowned, confused. Who is that? Is he a guest? I've never seen him before. He ignored all of it. Step by step, he moved closer. The little girl walked beside him, looking around curiously, but staying close. When he reached near the front, he stopped. For a brief moment, he hesitated. Then he looked directly at her. Not at her wheelchair, not at the situation. At her, his expression was calm. No pity, no awkwardness, just quiet understanding. The room felt still again. He took one small step closer and spoke in a gentle, steady voice. Shall we dance? The question hung in the air. It didn't make sense. Not in this moment. Not in front of all these people. A few guests even let out small, confused laughs. But he didn't move. He didn't repeat himself. He just stood there, waiting. The little girl looked up at the bride with a soft smile, as if she already believed the answer would be yes. The bride stared at him. For a second, she didn't understand what was happening. Dance? After everything? After being left alone in front of everyone? But there was something in his eyes. Something different. He wasn't trying to fix the situation. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply offering a moment, a way to breathe, a way to stand without standing. Her heart was still heavy. The pain was still there. But slowly, something else began to rise above it. A quiet sense of calm. Her fingers relaxed slightly. The noise in her mind softened. For the first time since the message, she didn't feel like she was about to break. She looked around the room. All those faces. All that judgment. And suddenly, it didn't matter as much. Her eyes returned to him. He was still waiting. Still calm. Still kind. She took a small breath. And then very slowly, she nodded. The hall fell silent as she nodded. Her heart was still pounding. But for the first time that day, a small flicker of hope appeared. The man smiled gently, a small, reassuring movement that somehow made the whole room feel less heavy. He reached out his hand, not with pressure, but with patience, waiting for her to guide the moment. She hesitated for a second, her fingers brushing against his, and then slowly placed her hand in his. The music started again, soft this time, almost hesitant, as if it too didn't know how to respond to what was happening. The melody floated through the room, warm and gentle, wrapping around them like a soft blanket. The guests watched, unsure whether to clap or remain silent, caught between curiosity and awe, but she didn't notice them. She didn't even notice the whispers fading into the background. All she could feel was the presence of the man beside her, steady and calm. He didn't try to rush her or make her move in a way she couldn't. Instead, he adjusted to her pace, letting her lead in a dance that had no rules, no expectations, just connection. The small movements they shared felt like a secret conversation between two souls who had never met before, but somehow understood each other completely. The little girl clapped softly from the side, her eyes shining. She had never seen a dance like this. Not a formal waltz, not a stage performance. This was something different, real, human, something that made the heavy air of the hall feel lighter, almost magical. At first, some guests murmured nervously, unsure how to react. A few even smiled, the corners of their mouths twitching as they realized what was happening. A powerful woman, abandoned at her own wedding, was now dancing, not with a stranger who tried to impress her, but with someone who saw her as a person, not a story, not a headline, just a human being deserving of dignity, kindness, and a gentle moment of joy. She closed her eyes for a second and let herself feel it. The soft movement of the wheelchair, the rhythm of the music, the steady presence of his hand. For a long time, she had felt alone, even in crowds, even in boardrooms filled with people who admired her strength. But here, in this moment, she wasn't alone. She was seen, really seen, in a way that didn't require explanation or justification. Her chest, which had felt tight for hours, began to loosen. She realized she could breathe again, without the weight pressing down on her. She could smile without fear of judgment. She could exist without proving herself. And that was powerful. The man didn't speak much. He didn't need to. Every gesture was careful, attentive, and respectful. When her wheelchair tilted slightly, he adjusted his step. When her hands moved to steady herself, he mirrored her motions. Every small action showed that he was paying attention, not just to her body, but to her needs, her comfort, her dignity. The dance wasn't about impressing anyone. It wasn't about elegance or perfection. It was about presence, about two people existing together in a moment that was entirely their own, even in the middle of a hall full of strangers. She realized how rare it was to feel like this, how rare it was to feel safe and accepted in a world that often demanded too much. She had lived with pain, struggle, and judgment for so long that moments of peace felt foreign. And yet, here it was offered freely, without expectation, without strings attached. As they moved, she noticed small details she hadn't before. The faint smile on his face when she laughed quietly at her own nervousness. The little girl's hand, waving in encouragement. The soft creak of the wooden floor beneath them, punctuating each gentle turn. Everything felt alive. Every sense heightened by the unusual beauty of the moment. Some guests began to clap quietly, moved by what they were witnessing. Not a performance, not a stage spectacle, but pure act of human connection that transcended wealth, status, and expectation. The whispers that filled the hall with awkward tension slowly transformed into admiration and awe. Her mind wandered briefly to what had happened just minutes ago. The message, the absence, the betrayal. For a moment, the pain threatened to return, but she pushed it aside. This moment, right now, was hers to own. The past had happened, yes, but the present was different. And in this moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Trust. Trust in someone who didn't know her history. Trust in someone who wasn't obligated to be here. Trust in a simple offer of a dance that became far more than a dance. It became a bridge between two worlds, one of loss, disappointment, and expectation, and one of hope, kindness, and genuine human care. The music shifted slightly, a soft change in melody, and the bride felt her body respond naturally. She laughed quietly, a soft, almost shy sound, as she realized how much tension had been in her shoulders without her noticing. He smiled, nodding slightly, and she could feel the encouragement in that small gesture. She didn't have to perform. She didn't have to impress. She only had to be herself, and that was enough. A few guests began to take out their phones quietly, capturing the moment. But even as the world started to intrude, she remained in her bubble of calm, of connection, of quiet joy. The little girl stayed close, clapping softly, cheering her on in small, innocent ways that made the moment even more human, more grounded. Minutes passed, though it felt like seconds. The room had transformed from a place of tension and embarrassment to a place of quiet beauty and respect. What had begun as an awkward, almost tragic scene became something unforgettable. She realized that this dance was more than a simple gesture. It was a statement that even in the face of rejection, of being left behind, of the world expecting her to crumble, she could still choose to experience grace. She could still choose to accept kindness. She could still allow herself to be vulnerable and still feel safe. The man glanced at her briefly, silently checking if she was okay, if she wanted to stop. She shook her head softly, smiling. No, she didn't want this moment to end. Not yet, not ever. She wanted to soak in the quiet strength it gave her, the sense of being truly understood without words. Around them, the guests began to whisper again, but this time in awe. They saw her strength, not just in her achievements or her survival, but in her ability to embrace something unexpected and pure. They saw her humanity, and they saw it reflected in the man beside her, whose own quiet strength had created the space of calm, connection, and dignity. She realized, too, that this moment was teaching her something. That sometimes the right people appear in the wrong place at the right time. That gestures, no matter how small, can shift everything. That human connection can be stronger than disappointment, richer than wealth, and more lasting than any carefully planned celebration. As the music began to fade, the dance slowed naturally. She felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't known was possible after the events of the day. She looked at him, and he looked at her. No words were necessary. The gratitude, the relief, the quiet joy, they were all in their eyes. The little girl clapped softly one last time, smiling. She had witnessed something rare, something beautiful. And in that small moment, the hall seemed to breathe with them, filled not with judgment or pity, but with respect, admiration, and the quiet magic of humanity connecting across differences. When the music stopped completely, he gently guided her wheelchair back to its starting place. She took a small, steadying breath, feeling grounded, seen, and supported in a way that had nothing to do with money or status. For the first time since the day had begun, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that the world could still offer kindness. Hope that even after betrayal and disappointment, life could surprise her. Hope that she was not alone, not truly, and that someone unexpected, was willing to step in and share a moment that reminded her of what really mattered. She looked at him one last time, and the world seemed quieter, slower, lighter. For the first time in a long while, she could breathe. She could smile. She could begin to imagine a life that wasn't just about success, appearances, or proving herself to the world. It could be about simple moments, human gestures, and the quiet courage to accept help, kindness, and presence from someone who truly saw her. And as the guests quietly began to murmur, moved by what they had just witnessed, she realized that even in the worst moments, beauty could emerge. Even in the pain of being left behind, connection could appear. Even in a hall full of strangers, a simple question, "Shall we dance?" could change everything. The moment ended, but its impact didn't. She felt it in her chest, in her heart, in her mind. It was a memory she would carry, a reminder that human kindness could arrive when least expected, and that sometimes the smallest gestures could be the strongest, most powerful act of love and respect imaginable. In the quiet aftermath, she smiled, not as a businesswoman, not as a bride, not as someone who had been abandoned, but as a person. And that, she realized, was enough. After the dance ended, the hall was quiet, but it was different now. The tension that filled the room earlier was gone, replaced by a strange calm. Guests whispered softly among themselves, some still staring in amazement. The bride's chest felt lighter than it had all day, though her mind was still racing. The man who had danced with her was standing nearby, holding the little girl's hand, waiting patiently, not rushing her, not demanding anything. She looked at him, curious. Who was he? Why had he done this? He had stepped into her day without permission, into a moment that had been ruined, and somehow turned it into something gentle, something beautiful. She realized she wanted to know him, wanted to understand why he had appeared when no one else had. I don't know what to say, she said quietly, almost to herself. Her voice was soft, but it carried a hint of gratitude. He smiled, a small, calm smile that felt warm rather than showy. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. His voice was steady, and there was no hint of judgment in it. "I just saw you sitting here, and it didn't feel right. I wanted to help." She studied him for a moment. Help. The word felt different when it came from him. Not pity, not charity. Just a simple, human gesture. For years, she had been surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Respect, influence, attention, loyalty. But here was someone who gave something without expecting anything in return. "I thank you," she said finally, "for the dance, for everything." Her words were small, but sincere. He shook his head slightly. "It's okay. Really. You deserve a better moment than what happened. There was a pause. She glanced at the little girl, who was looking up at her with wide, trusting eyes. She noticed how naturally the girl seemed to accept her, not even thinking about her wheelchair, not even hesitating. And that made her heart ache a little in a good way. Children had a way of seeing people without judgment, without hesitation. Adults had lost that ability somewhere along the way. She cleared her throat, trying to steady her thoughts. "Can I ask who you are?" "I'm just a single dad," he said simply. "I was helping with some setup today. Nothing fancy. I don't usually come to weddings like this." A single dad. The words hit her in a strange way. Not rich, not famous, not part of her world of power, money, and influence. Yet somehow, he had managed to make a mark stronger than anyone else in the room. She felt a small laugh escape her lips. "And yet, you managed to save my wedding," she said, trying to lighten the mood. It wasn't really funny, but somehow it made the heaviness in her chest shift. He smiled again, and this time was full and genuine. "I didn't save it," he said. "I just wanted you to feel seen for a moment. That's all." She realized how rare that was. To be truly seen, not admired, not judged, not praised, just seen for who she was, not her wealth, not her achievements, not even her disability, just her. They sat together for a few moments, not speaking, just letting the silence hold them. It was a comfortable silence, one that didn't need to be filled with small talk or explanations. Sometimes silence said more than words ever could. She found herself studying him. His hands were callous, his clothes simple, his hair slightly messy. He looked ordinary at first glance, but the more she looked, the more she realized there was something extraordinary in his calm presence, in the way he listened, in the way he didn't try to take over or impress. He was strong in a quiet way, the kind of strength that didn't need to be announced. "Your daughter, she's wonderful," she said softly, nodding toward the little girl. He glanced down at her and smiled. "She's my whole world. I lost her mother a few years ago. Since then, everything I do is for her." The words hit her in a deep place. Loss, responsibility, love. She understood that kind of struggle. She had fought for everything in her life, faced challenges that had seemed impossible, and had often felt alone. But he had his own battles, different from hers, yet just as real. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for what I said before about not needing help. I realize now it's not weakness to accept kindness." He shook his head. "No need to apologize. Everyone has their moments. Today, we both had ours." There was a pause. She realized she wanted to know more about him. Not for business, not for appearances, not even for a story to tell later. She wanted to know him because he had entered her life in a moment when she felt most abandoned and had given her a sense of connection she hadn't known she needed. "Would you like some tea?" she asked, surprising herself. "There's a small room behind the hall. We can sit quietly. No one else needs to be there." He looked at her for a moment and then nodded. "I'd like that." They moved slowly together, her wheelchair gliding across the polished floor, his hand steadying her slightly as they navigated the small obstacles. The little girl held her other hand, curious and happy, excited to explore this new space with them. In the quiet room, away from the crowd, she finally let herself relax. No cameras, no guests, no expectations. Just a woman, a man, and a little girl, sharing a moment of humanity that felt bigger than any celebration could. They talked about simple things at first. The weather, the music, the little girl's favorite stories. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced. But with every word, every laugh, every glance, she felt the tension in her chest loosen. She realized how rare it was to meet someone who could make her feel safe, understood, and unjudged all at once. Hours could have passed like minutes. The conversation flowed naturally, like a quiet river moving steadily, washing away the bitterness and hurt that filled her day. She found herself smiling, laughing quietly, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't try to rush her or fix anything. He didn't ask about her wealth, her success, or her achievements. He didn't treat her like a charity case. He simply shared his life in small, honest pieces, and she found herself responding in kind, opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She realized something important. Real connections didn't need extravagance or ceremony. They didn't need power, status, or wealth. They needed presence, honesty, and care. And in this quiet room, she had all three. At one point, the little girl leaned against her wheelchair and whispered something softly. She didn't understand the words completely, but the intention was clear: trust, comfort, and acceptance. The bride felt tears prick her eyes again, not from sadness this time, but from relief and a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. They stayed together until the hall cleared, until the guests left or moved on. When it was just them, she realized that the man had completely shifted her perspective on the day. What had begun as a disaster, being left at her own wedding, had turned into something she would remember forever. She looked at him, studying his calm expression. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said softly. He smiled gently. "You don't need to. Just remember that moments like this are worth holding on to. Not the weddings, not the celebrations, not the appearances. Just moments. Moments of real connection." She nodded, feeling the truth of it deep in her chest. She had spent so long building walls, protecting herself, expecting the world to fail her. But in that room, with a man who had nothing to gain and a little girl who didn't care about appearances, she felt something she hadn't in years. Genuine human kindness. For the first time since the morning, she felt hope stirring quietly. Hope that life could be different. Hope that people could be real and moments could be pure. Hope that even in a world filled with judgment, loneliness, and betrayal, it was still possible to meet someone who made you feel safe, seen, and valued. As they prepared to leave the quiet room, she felt a small but firm determination forming inside her. This wasn't just about surviving the wedding. This was about opening herself to life again, to moments that mattered, to connections that could change her world. And as she wheeled herself back into the main hall, side by side with him and the little girl, she realized that the most unexpected people could leave the deepest marks. That sometimes it took being abandoned, being hurt, to recognize the quiet strength and courage of someone who simply chose to be present when it mattered most. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years, and for the first time that day, she believed in simple, honest, human kindness again. The world outside might still be chaotic, judgmental, and harsh, but in this room, in this moment, she found a rare truth. The strongest bonds were often formed not by grandeur, wealth, or power, but by the courage to show up, the willingness to care, and the bravery to dance when no one else could. And with that thought, she knew her life had quietly begun to change. After that day, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The single dad and his little daughter had appeared in her life in the most unexpected way, turning her worst moment into something she would never forget. She replayed the dance, his calm presence, the way it made her feel seen without pity or judgment. She wondered about his life, how he carried himself with such quiet strength, and how someone with so little could give so much. Days passed, and she realized she wanted to see him again, not because of a fleeting connection, not because of the excitement of the wedding drama, but because she genuinely wanted to know him. She wanted to understand a man who had reminded her that kindness and presence were sometimes more valuable than wealth or status. She reached out carefully, not through formal channels or business contacts, but through simple human means. She asked a few people at the venue about him, and eventually, she found a way to contact him. When he answered the phone, she felt a flutter of nervousness she hadn't experienced in years. "Hi," she said, her voice soft. I just want to say thank you again. And maybe meet up, if that's okay." There was a pause. Then he spoke, his voice calm and steady as ever. "I'd like that. There's no rush, no expectations." They agreed to meet the next afternoon at a quiet cafe, away from the grandeur and judgment of her usual world. She arrived early, observing the people around her, noticing how different this place was from her usual environment. No one cared about wealth, appearances, or status. People simply existed, and that was comforting. He arrived a few minutes later, the little girl holding his hand, her eyes lighting up when she saw the bride. The bride smiled, feeling an immediate warmth she hadn't expected. They exchanged greetings, small and natural, as if no special effort was required. They found a quiet corner and sat together. The little girl pulled out a small book she had brought, sitting on the floor beside them. drawing quietly as they talked. The bride watched her, thinking how much she had missed seeing life in such simple, unguarded ways. The child's innocence, curiosity, and trust reminded her of what life could feel like without constant pressure, judgment, and expectations. She turned to him, studying his face carefully. His eyes were calm, honest, and kind. His hands rested gently on the table. He didn't speak to impress, didn't talk to control, didn't need to prove himself. He simply was. And she realized that was rare, very rare. They began to talk about small things first. His job, his routines, the challenges he faced as a single father. She shared some of her own experiences, carefully omitting the parts about wealth and business, focusing instead on the human side, the struggles, the small victories, the days when life felt impossible. She felt a connection growing, one that had nothing to do with status or money. It was built purely on understanding, shared humanity, and mutual respect. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't hiding behind a shield of success or trying to maintain an image. She could be herself, and it was enough. The little girl looked up occasionally, asking questions in her innocent way, pulling small laughs from both adults. They answered patiently, enjoying the simplicity and honesty of her curiosity. The bride realized that her presence mattered to the child too, that she could make a positive impact in a way that had nothing to do with authority or power. As the conversation continued, she found herself opening up more than she expected. She talked about the wedding, the hurt she felt, and how strange it was to experience such betrayal publicly. He listened without interrupting, without offering cliches or empty reassurances. He simply acknowledged her feelings, giving them weight and recognition. "That must have been hard," he said finally, "to have someone leave you at a moment like that." She nodded. "It was more than hard. It was humiliating. But then you showed up. And for a moment, everything shifted. You didn't fix anything. You didn't make excuses. You just were there. And that mattered more than anything else." He smiled, a quiet, modest smile. "I just saw what was happening. I couldn't walk away." They shared a small laugh. She realized that humor, even in small doses, could bridge gaps, calm hearts, and create connection. It reminded her that life, even when painful, could have light moments. Hours passed unnoticed. The cafe emptied slowly around them, but they remained, caught up in the flow of conversation, laughter, and quiet reflection. The bride noticed how much easier it felt to speak honestly here, without any pretense or expectation. And he noticed it too. He recognized the walls she had built over the years, and instead of trying to tear them down, he simply offered space for her to let them down herself. She realized that was a kind of strength she had never encountered before. Not brute force or wealth, but steady, patient, compassionate strength. It made her heart ache a little in a good way. She admired it, not out of need, but out of respect. As the afternoon turned to evening, they decided to take a small walk outside. The city streets were quiet, bathed in the soft light of early dusk. They moved slowly, her wheelchair gliding beside him, his hand occasionally brushing hers lightly, reassuringly. The little girl skipped ahead occasionally, laughing at the small discoveries of the street, pulling both adults into her joy. She felt a sense of normalcy she hadn't known in years. A moment free of the pressures of business, success, and public perception. A moment where human connection, simple kindness, and honesty were enough. During the walk, she asked him about his life before becoming a single dad. He spoke briefly about his wife, her loss, and the struggles that followed. She listened carefully, with empathy and understanding, recognizing pain similar to her own. Not the same, but real, human, important. "I can't imagine raising a child alone," she said quietly. "The strength that takes." He shrugged slightly, modestly. "You do what you have to. You survive. You try to make life good for them, even when it feels impossible." She nodded, feeling a deep respect for him, not for his bravery in a dramatic sense, but for his consistent, quiet perseverance. It reminded her of herself in many ways. Different circumstances, same courage, same determination to move forward despite challenges. They returned to the cafe as the sun set, casting long shadows across the empty streets. The day had been simple in events, but profound in impact. She realized she was beginning to see life differently, through a lens that valued presence over performance, kindness over status, and authenticity over image. Before they parted, she looked at him seriously. "I want you to know I appreciate you for everything, for the dance, for today, for showing me something I didn't realize I was missing." He smiled softly. "No need to thank me. I just try to do what I can when it matters." She felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't experienced in years. She had been surrounded by people all her life. People who admired her, judged her, envied her, or expected something from her. But he and his little daughter had given her something different. Genuine care, attention, and human connection without expectation. She realized how much she had missed that in her life. How much she'd been wrapped up in appearances, status, and achievement that often left her lonely, isolated, and unseen in the ways that truly mattered. As she watched them leave, hand in hand, she felt something shift inside her. A quiet sense of possibility. A sense that life, even after betrayal and abandonment, could still hold unexpected beauty. That connections could emerge from the most unlikely places. That moments of genuine human kindness could change everything. She returned to her own world slowly, but her heart felt lighter. She knew she would never forget this day, the way they had stepped into her life without expectation, and the way a single question, "Shall we dance?" had opened a door she didn't even realize was closed. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope that life could be different, that people could be real, that kindness, patience, and presence were more powerful than wealth, power, or appearances. And she knew, quietly, that this was only the beginning. The beginning of seeing life in a new way, of accepting moments without judgment, and of opening herself to connections that could be truly meaningful. Because sometimes the right people appear at the wrong place at the right time. And sometimes that was all it took to change everything. She smiled to herself as she wheeled away, a small, quiet smile that spoke of hope, gratitude, and the gentle understanding that life, even when harsh, could still surprise her in the most beautiful ways. Weeks turned into months, and the bride's life began to change in ways she hadn't imagined. The memory of being abandoned at her own wedding no longer felt like a wound, sharp and raw, but like a lesson that had reshaped her. She thought often about the single dad and his little daughter, the two people who had entered her life unexpectedly and shown her a side of humanity she had almost forgotten existed. She began seeing him more regularly, not out of obligation, not because of curiosity, but because she genuinely wanted to. Each meeting was simple, honest, and real. No pretense, no expectations, no need to perform. She could be herself, the woman behind the wealth, the power, the achievements, and it was enough. He remained steady, patient, and kind. His life was full of challenges, and she admired how he navigated them with quiet strength. He never boasted, never complained unnecessarily, and never tried to impress her. He simply showed up, and that, she realized, was rare. One evening, she invited him and his daughter to her apartment. It wasn't grandiose, but warm, filled with personal touches and memories that mattered to her. The little girl immediately ran around, curious about everything, while she and the man settled in the living room. They talked about their days, their small victories, and the little hardships that didn't make headlines. She found herself laughing more than she had in years, smiling at the little girl's antics, and sharing stories from her past she had never told anyone. The more she opened up, the more she realized how isolated she had been, not because of her disability or wealth, but because she built walls to protect herself from disappointment and betrayal. He listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging. Sometimes he offered small insights, quiet wisdom drawn from experience rather than books or lectures. Sometimes he simply nodded, letting her words settle without interference. She began to understand that real strength often came quietly, without announcement or spectacle. The little girl sat on the floor, drawing pictures and asking questions in her innocent way. Her presence reminded the bride of the simple joys of life she had long forgotten. Small moments, unguarded laughter, and trust that didn't need to be earned. She felt a bond forming, not only with the man but with the child as well. In them, she saw the beauty of connection that required nothing but attention, care, and presence. Over time, their meetings became a part of her life. They went for walks in the park, spent afternoons reading books together, and shared quiet dinners where conversation flowed naturally. Each encounter reinforced what she had felt that first day, the power of kindness, presence, and genuine human connection. She noticed changes in herself, too. She no longer felt the constant pressure to impress, to prove, to maintain an image. She allowed herself to be vulnerable, to accept help, and to trust that not everyone would leave or betray her. She learned to laugh without caution, to speak without calculation, and to feel without fear. He shared more of his life with her gradually. Stories of struggles, of nights spent worrying about his daughter's future, of small victories he had never celebrated publicly. She listened with empathy, realizing how much strength it took to keep moving forward without complaint or expectation. She felt inspired, not in the usual sense of ambition or achievement, but in the sense of quiet resilience that spoke louder than any words. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the city lights twinkle below, she found herself speaking from the heart. "I never thought someone like you could teach me something I've been missing my whole life," she said softly. "Not wealth, not success, not even love in the way I expected. Just kindness and presence. You've shown me how much that matters." He looked at her with calm, steady eyes. "I didn't teach you anything. You already had it inside you. I just reminded you that it exists, that it can exist with the right people and moments." She nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just comfort, it was clarity. She had spent so long believing she had to be strong alone, that reliance or trust was weakness. But here, in this moment, she realized that real strength was not about isolation. It was about connection, courage, and the willingness to let someone in without fear. The little girl tugged at her hand. "Come look," she said, pointing to a drawing she had made. It was a simple picture of the three of them, holding hands, smiling. The bride felt her heart swell. She realized that family, love, and connection could take forms she hadn't anticipated. They didn't need to follow society's rules or traditions. They only needed honesty and care. As months continued, she became more comfortable integrating this unexpected bond into her life. She invited him to her home for holidays, shared meals, and even worked on small projects together, learning from his perspective and experiences. Their worlds, though so different in background and circumstance, began to merge naturally. She began to notice changes in how others viewed her too. Friends and colleagues initially expressed surprise at her choice of companionship. Some whispered doubts, questioning why a woman of wealth and power would spend so much time with a single dad who lived so differently. But she paid little attention to their opinions. For the first time, she realized that other people's judgments no longer defined her. Her life, her choices, her happiness, those were hers alone. One quiet evening, as they all sat together after dinner, the little girl looked up and said something that struck the bride deeply. "I like that you're happy now. You smile more than before." It wasn't just a casual remark. It was an observation that carried weight, a recognition of the change that had quietly unfolded. She realized the little girl had seen what others had missed, the transformation that came not from wealth, power, or status, but from connection, understanding, and love that was honest and simple. The bride felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not of sadness. They were tears of gratitude and relief, of realizing that life could hold beauty even after betrayal and loss. She had been left alone on the days she expected love. Yet in that absence, life had delivered something even more profound, a chance to rediscover trust, joy, and connection in ways she had never imagined. The single dad, noticing her emotions, reached out and gently took her hand. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to hide anything. It's safe here." And it was safe in the sense of acceptance, safe in the sense of understanding, safe in the sense that she no longer had to pretend, protect, or perform. She could simply be herself, and that was enough. Time passed, and the bond between them deepened. It wasn't dramatic or forced. It was steady, growing naturally through shared experiences, honest conversations, and small, meaningful gestures. She learned to rely on him in ways she had never allowed herself to rely on anyone. He learned to trust her in ways he had never allowed himself to trust another adult outside of his own family. And together, they built a quiet, resilient foundation of mutual respect, care, and understanding. The bride realized that what had seemed like a tragic day the day of her wedding abandonment, was actually a turning point. It forced her to confront her vulnerability, her expectations, and her assumptions about life and relationships. In that moment of loss, she found something far more enduring: authentic human connection, unconditional support, and the courage to open herself fully to life again. Eventually, she felt ready to step into the world differently. She no longer needed validation from strangers or approval from society. Her focus shifted from appearances and power to meaningful relationships, genuine moments, and shared experiences. She embraced life not as a series of accomplishments to showcase, but as a journey filled with people, moments, and connections that made each day worthwhile. One afternoon, she reflected quietly as she watched a man and his daughter playing in the park. The sight filled her with warmth. She had discovered something profound. True strength was not measured in wealth, influence, or status, but in the ability to connect, to give, and to receive kindness without fear. She realized that her greatest lesson had been delivered not by power, luxury, or achievement, but by a man who appeared unexpectedly, simply asking, "Shall we dance?" That simple act had changed the course of her life, teaching her to embrace vulnerability, accept help, and trust that the right people would appear when needed most. She smiled, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. Her life was no longer defined by wealth, success, or appearances, but by the quiet strength of love, care, and human connection. She knew that challenges would still come, but she also knew that she was no longer alone in facing them. As the sun set over the city, casting golden light across the park, she felt gratitude, hope, and a renewed sense of purpose. The past could not be changed, but the present was hers to live fully, authentically, and bravely. She had been left alone on her wedding day, but in that emptiness, life had given her a gift far greater than she could have imagined. The little girl ran up to her, tugging at her hand, and whispered something softly. "You're my favorite." And in that moment, she realized the truth she had discovered over the months. Life's greatest joy did not come from wealth, power, or perfection. It came from the quiet moments of connection, the courage to be vulnerable, and the people who showed up when it mattered most. She squeezed the little girl's hand, glanced at the man, and felt a quiet, unshakable certainty. This was her life now. Not perfect, not planned, not always easy, but real, human, and full of meaning. And sometimes, she reflected, all it took to begin again was someone willing to ask a simple question, step forward and say, "Shall we dance?" From that moment on, she never doubted the power of human connection again. It had saved her in ways she could never have imagined, and would guide her through the rest of her life with quiet, enduring strength.